Evening. Hope everyone is off to a great start of their week. I'm Trapper Fowler. I'm your Habitat Connectivity Director here at Wild Virginia. And tonight we're so very lucky to have biologist Katie Martin with us from DWR talking about black bears. May is typically a high call volume time for human bear interactions. So really appreciate Katie taking the time out of her very busy schedule, I can assure you, to help educate and inform us about one of our favorite species. I too have worked on several black bear projects and do find this to be one truly charismatic animal. I had to share this picture just because of what my wife says about it. So this is me working on a black bear project, an urban black bear project near Asheville, North Carolina. Truly, best day on the job for me, getting to hold these three black bear cubs. When I sent this picture to my wife, as I was leaving the field and heading back, a couple hour drive back to where we were living at the time, she said, "Oh my gosh." She said, I can't believe how big your smile is. This smile is bigger than the one you had when our child was born. So that has always stuck with me. Truly a big grin here from me, yours truly, but definitely a big day that I will always remember. First, some housekeeping items. I want to let you know that we are recording this program, and the reason for that is so that it'll be available later. We'll send those out so that you can share it around. Again, if you missed me saying, please introduce yourself in the chat. Give us your name and where you're joining from this evening. For questions for Katie or for Wild Virginia, hopefully most of them are for Katie. Please locate those in the Q&A box, not in the chat. It's okay if some end up over there. We'll try to get to those at the end and field as many as we can with respect of everyone's time, especially our speaker. Don't hesitate to put questions in the chat as we move forward with the presentation. We can all learn from your questions, so don't be shy. And again, we're recording this so that we can share it out later. So you will receive an email with a link to this recording so you can share it around or review it later. In addition to our habitat connectivity program that I help manage for Wild Virginia, we also have our water quality program, in which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. That's led by Mr. David Sly. So please also tune into those program events and advocacy engagement opportunities that are upcoming. I also want to thank Kylie for helping in the background tonight, keeping us straight, and ensuring everything runs smooth. Please note that Wild Virginia can't do this very important work without you. We get our energy from you all, the energy to keep pushing for better wildlife habitat connectivity and water quality protection. So please consider supporting Wild Virginia. We appreciate your support, whether that's through donating or just helping to help show up and advocate when needed. So everybody can help in their own way, and we appreciate that. I did want to mention that the Virginia Black Bear Festival is coming up. Katie might even be at this one. But Wild Virginia will also be there. Katie's giving a thumbs up. So you can come and see both Wild Virginia and DWR, Katie, on June 6th. So please take note of that. There's a link down there at the bottom. I'll be sure to put in the chat so you can find out more information. But please stop by and say hello. We'll be tabling there all day. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this evening, biologist Katie Martin. Katie is a statewide deer, bear, and turkey biologist for the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. In this role, she works within the Forest Wildlife Program alongside the project leaders to implement management programs for these three iconic big game species. Katie works extensively with human-wildlife conflict, research, and population monitoring and surveys across these programs. She's been with the Department of Wildlife Resources for 15 years, serving as a district wildlife biologist in the southern Piedmont prior to her current role. Katie earned both her undergraduate and graduate degrees from Virginia Tech in wildlife science and forestry. We are so thankful to have Katie with us tonight. Here's just some general contact information for us over at Wild Virginia, should you need it. And while we switch over to our speaker screen, so take it away, Katie.
Awesome. Well, thank you so
Mhm.
much for having me tonight. I'm pretty excited to get to talk to you all about bears. Well, I work with deer, bear, and turkey. I have to say, bear's probably my favorite, so I don't tell everybody that. But it's definitely one that probably tugs at my heart the most. So, and yeah, I'll put in a shameless plug for the Black Bear Festival too. That thing is awesome. It's a lot of fun, good presentations, good table and events, good food, lots of good stuff to buy. So hope everybody can come out to that as well. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about some bears here in Virginia, and I saw somebody posted in the chat. Yep, timely because cubs have shown up at the Wildlife Center. We have had a busy cub year this year, so it's been a little hectic, but that's all right. So first, I just kind of wanted to tell you a little bit about who is the Department of Wildlife Resources. So a lot of times folks kind of misinterpret us or mistake us for state parks folks or forest rangers. Who the heck is DWR? And so some of you may remember we used to be called the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. This is the exact same folks. We just changed our name to Wildlife Resources. They did a survey and found that a lot of folks just didn't understand what Department of Game meant and thought maybe we worked with like the lottery, gambling, things like that. That's not what we do. We're with wildlife. So changed our name to try to help people realize it. But our big part of our mission statement is really in those orange letters there, the conserve, connect, and protect. We want to conserve wildlife populations and habitat for now and the future. We want to connect people to the outdoors. And then we want to protect, property, have safe experiences in the outdoors, and manage human wildlife conflict. So just a little bit about us. You can check us out. We've got our website. I'll have some information at the end. We have a YouTube page with a lot of cool videos and education as well. All right, but tonight let's talk about bears. So we're just going to hit kind of real brief on population status of bears here in Virginia, then get into some habitat connectivity things, human bear conflicts, a little bit about sarcoptic mange that's impacting our bear population, and then quick hits on some current bear research that we've got going on in the state. It's pretty exciting time. Actually, we've got some bear research going on, and so I want to share just a little bit about that. So, where in the state do we have bears? Well, if you're in any of those green counties, you're in bear country. So we pretty well say that if you live in Virginia, you live in bear country. Over there, kind of on the eastern shore, northern neck areas of the Tidewater, it's more rare or occasional that we'll see a black bear, but really across all the rest of those places in the state, not uncommon to see black bears. As we go further to the east, they're a little less dense of a population. Our mountainous areas have a little bit higher population, and I'll show you some graphs of that here in a moment. But pretty much, if you're a Virginia resident, you live in bear country. So, and we're happy about that. We like to see bears back across the state. So, black bears in Virginia are really just part of a larger group of contiguous bears that run all the way from Florida up into Maine. So all of the 13 southeastern states have black bear populations, which is pretty cool. And most of these are recovered black bear populations. Here in Virginia, back if you'd have been here 100 years ago, 120, 30 years ago, it would have been rare to see bears across a lot of the landscape because they had been hunted almost to extinction or they had almost been extirpated from the state. Now, thankfully, we have really healthy bear populations that have come back due to habitat protection, hunting seasons, regulations, and things like that. So in Virginia, show you this graphic here, the darker green are where we have our more dense populations of bears, lighter green, a little bit less dense populations of bears across the state. And so this is based on, we do a population index. It's not a little hard to go out and count every single bear. So this is just an index of our bear population that's based off of our harvest data. And I will say that where you see that darker color, like Augusta, Rockbridge, Botetourt, that was where we had our densest population of bears. Probably now that's changed a little bit due to sarcoptic mange and some other things on the landscape. But you'll also notice down there in the far southeastern part of the state around the Dismal Swamp, that is another place where we have a very high density of black bears, and they are thriving and doing very well down there. Likely because not too many people down there, if you've ever been around in the swamp, it's pretty thick and not many people are going to go around in there and disturb too much of anything. So, what does a bear need to survive? What are its habitat requirements? What does it need out there? Well, pretty much the same thing that most other wildlife species need. So, food, water, some cover, and a little bit different for bears. They do need den sites for their winter denning, especially for the females that are going to have cubs. And ideally, they like a mix of habitat types. So they're not using just one specific habitat throughout the entire year. They need a broad mix of things. And we'll talk about why they need that mix of things when we talk a little bit about their movements. But some of the big key parts of their habitat, they need mast producing trees. So things like acorns from oak trees, hickories, beech nuts, soft mass like dogwood berries, black gum berries, any of the soft mass producing trees out there. So that's really important food source for them. They like early successional habitats, so thick brushy areas. Those usually have a lot of grasses and forbs that they'll eat on. Also, usually a lot of blackberries in those type of habitats, and bears, like probably a lot of us, love blackberries, so that's a good place for them to be. But then they'll use mature forest, various age classes of forest structure, just depending on, what's out there. They love to be near water, so a lot of times they will travel along river corridors, creeks, or drainages. They do love to swim, so it's not uncommon to see them around water bodies where they'll go, especially when it's 95 degrees in May, they're going to go for a nice swim. And then they'll use open habitat, so a wide mix of things. So one of the most important types of habitat for black bears is really oak producing oak forest. So having hard mast out there on the landscape is really critical for black bears and for numerous other wildlife species, but we'll talk about bears tonight. So in the fall, in a year when we have got a good oak crop, a good mass crop out there of acorns, bears can put on over 2 pounds a day of gaining weight. And this is important, of course, because they're trying to fatten up in the fall before we go into the wintertime, not as much to eat out there. And this is really important, especially for the females, because if they can put on enough weight, then they'll actually have cubs that winter. If they're not able to put on sufficient weight in the late summer and the fall, they actually won't have cubs. So they do this thing called delayed implantation, where they breed in the summertime, but they're actually not pregnant until the fall, all based on kind of the fat layer and their body condition. So pretty cool how that all works. But we see in years with good acorn production, high cub year. This past year, last fall, we had a really good acorn production across the state. And when we did den checks this winter, a lot of cubs out there on the landscape. And a lot of cubs now ending up at the rehab center because people are picking them up. So we don't like that part of it, but it was good that that was a good fall food source. And then just the opposite, years when we don't have that food source, we're not going to see as many cubs. And we also usually end up seeing higher human bear conflicts in those years of poor mass production because when that natural food source isn't there, bears are going to stay up, go around in neighborhoods, look for trash, bird seed, all the stuff we don't want them in. And so this is really critical. This is a habitat type that we do see declining across the state. Mature oak forests that are healthy and actually producing acorns have been in pretty significant decline for some time. There's a lot of work going into trying to do forest restoration for this, but I'll show you some maps here in a bit. Bears move a lot throughout their home range and then throughout the year. And one of the reasons they move is to look for food sources. And so this is where habitat connectivity, safe corridors is really important for them to get to these food sources that they really need to get to. So how do bears move about? So I've got just a little kind of average here of home ranges for male and female bears in the state. And this can vary greatly across the state, really dependent on habitat, but just kind of in general, a female bear's home range in Virginia can range from about 3 square miles up to maybe 7 square miles. So that's big. Bears don't use tiny spaces, they move around a lot. Then you look at a male bear, they're using anywhere from 5 square miles to maybe 12 plus square miles as a home range for them. So again, huge, huge areas that these animals are moving about. So they need big, big habitats, big connected areas where they can move and get to everything. So in the spring, As bears are leaving these dens, this is a time of a lot of movement. They're trying to find food after being kind of tucked in for the winter, not moving around a lot. Spring means let's find some food. This time of year in the spring, like early spring through the early summer, you might see adult females out with their cubs, and then they may still have yearlings, those bears that are about 16 months old, 18 months old, still with them, before she's going to kick those guys away in the summertime so she can breed again. And then the male bears are pretty much solitary. You're not going to see them with other bears except during the summer when the breeding season starts up. Then they'll be trailing around looking for a female. So kind of starting mid-May, we start seeing those yearling bears disperse, and this is a time that we start getting a lot of calls about bears getting into conflict because those yearlings, we kind of equate them to teenagers. So they don't know what to do. They've lived with mom for 16 to 18 months. She's taken care of them, shown them where to go. Now all of a sudden she's told them, hey, you got to get out, go do your own thing. So these are the bears that often end up kind of in urban areas, little bit lost. I don't know if anybody is from the Richmond area, but last week we had one that wandered into literally downtown Richmond and got himself stuck a little bit, so had to help him get back out into some better habitat. But these guys, they're just trying to find where they can set up shop and find resources that they need. And then once we get into the fall, again, it's all looking for food. So they are moving a great deal in search of just any food sources they could find. And in those years of good acorn production, honing in on those food sources. So bears have an incredible memory and can remember where they've found these food sources. So they'll travel sometimes long distances to get to a grove of oaks, for example, or a crop field that they know has had food in the past. So let's look a little bit about what do bear movements in Virginia look like. So all these dots come from GPS collar data from bears that we have trapped and handled and outfitted with GPS collars. So it's just like your phone. As you're moving around, it's taking points. It's logging your location. It's bear's location, not my location. And so this bear has a really tight home range. This is over several years. We had this bear collared for several years. She got retrapped, or we saw her in her den multiple times. Had a pretty long history with this bear, and she liked a really small home range. She just didn't move far. But you'll see there kind of on the northwestern part of the map, that's the James River that runs through there. Every few years, every few weeks, she would run up there and cross the river, and there were some ag fields up there. And so in years when she couldn't find enough natural foods in her home range, she'd make a move of about 20 miles to go up into those ag fields, much to the chagrin of a farmer up there, and eat some corn that he had, usually is what she was after. But this is a pretty tight home range for a female black bear. This one, I know the graphic is a little bit hard to see here, but this kind of shows, one, why habitat is important, and two, how road corridors can be really important. So on the far western side of that map, you'll see there's a green star. So this was actually a bear back in 2016, when we were first looking into sarcoptic mange in the state. We captured some bears that had mange and we tried a treatment regimen on them just to see if that would help anything. Could they survive with treatment? Did that do anything? So this bear was treated. She was released after treatment over there on the national forest in the far western part of the state. Well, you can see over about a 2 week period, she made about a 300-mile detour back to where she had actually originally came from. She came from Loudoun County. We had decided not to release her back where she came from, but she decided she was going back home. So that bear in 2 weeks traveled some 300 miles. She crossed Interstate 81, 66, 522, Route 17. She went up into Maryland, West Virginia, came back down, somehow made it across all of those roads, but knew how to get back home. And in the end, she made it to about 7 miles from where she was originally captured. And we'll talk about here a little bit later how we deal with conflict while we don't move bears. This is a great example of we don't move them because they'll figure out how to get back home. So that's pretty big movements for a bear. That was a bear moving, trying to get back to her home range. This is another example, several bears that we've had GPS collared as part of a research project. All of the big blobs of dots, I'll call them, are kind of these bears' core home ranges. And then you'll see this big arrow in the middle of the map. And this was a year we had a hard mast failure. So all across this, these bears were captured on a forest, usually had pretty good habitat and acorn conditions there. But one year it was super dry, just didn't have any acorns. And so we had four different female bears who all had a home range in this area through here. All of them, within about 2 days of each other, moved almost 40 miles again across the James River in search of different food. And again, it was crop fields up there that they were able to go and get some corn, standing corn that had been left at this time in the early fall. But just really wild to see these bears who had never been up there before that we had seen while they had been collared all made this move within a couple of days, traveled 40 some miles. They went up there, they ate for about 3 or 4 days, and then all of them turned around, came back to their home range. So it was super cool to see, but again, just shows, movements of these bears. They're crossing roads, they're going long distances in search of food. So that was pretty neat to see. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about human conflict, which is what I deal quite a bit with through the spring and summer months. So you'll see when we talk about conflicts with bears, we stick the human in the front of it because honestly, the bear is usually just trying to get food, easy food resources. It's all about calories in versus what they have to expend to get those calories. So if you're a bear, you're foraging around in the woods, maybe you're looking for some wild berries, looking for acorns, that can take a lot of effort, pretty hard, and you're getting kind of minimal calories at a time that way. You go into somebody's backyard and you rip down the bird feeder, you can chug down about 2,000 calories in a single bird feeder. So you can see it's really easy food sources, easy calories for them. That's why they do it. Our garbage is like cake, I think, or really good stuff to black bears. They love trash. We put a lot of stuff in our trash that they love to eat. So it's not that the bear is trying to be a troublemaker. It's literally just trying to find those easy food sources. So across the state, most years we log all of these calls that come in about conflicts with black bears, and we'll average, close to 2,500, some years almost close to 3,000 calls just about bear conflict in the state. Doesn't include all the deer conflict or foxes or groundhogs or everything else that people call our helpline about. Just bear calls can make up 2,500 to 3,000 calls a year. And you can see we get these calls all across the state, although they can be concentrated in areas where we have higher human density, which makes sense. More people around when they see a bear, they might call in about it. And these conflicts can range anything from just a sighting of a bear. For some people, that's enough to trigger they want to call and let us know they've seen a bear and what should they do about it, to trash cans, bird feeders, grills, compost piles, you name it, all kinds of things that a bear likes to get into. So our approach with conflict is really a lot of education and outreach. And so it's going and talking to people about bears. How can they learn to live with bears? How can they get a little bit higher tolerance of having bears and honestly other wildlife in their backyard? And so that's our number one approach, handing out materials, talking to people, letting them know why that bear is there, and helping them secure whatever it is that that bear is there for. Because again, the bear is simply there looking for some easy food. They really don't want to be around people except to find these easy food sources that we leave out. So that's kind of our first step, helping people realize why that bear is there, maybe helping them secure those attractants. Sometimes we have to up the ante a little bit and kind of haze the bear, maybe use some paintballs, electric fencing, rubber rounds, just to kind of help that bear learn that, hey, being close to people is not where it wants to be. It needs to go on back into more natural habitats. And then the last step, if we have to, for a bear that has become just extremely food conditioned or habituated to people, where it's just starting to come towards people, doesn't have any fear, and is finding a food source from people, very rarely we have to then end up dispatching a bear in those cases. Thankfully, not very often that we have to do that, but that is kind of our last step if we have a bear that we just can't deal with any other way. And so you'll see there, a lot of people ask us, can you just move the bear? Can you take it to a sanctuary or a park or somewhere where bears like to live? Just get it out of my backyard and move it somewhere else. Well, unfortunately, as I showed you on that map, if we moved a bear, it would probably just get into a problem somewhere else because we have bears all across the state and we have people all across the state. It also doesn't fix the problem there at the site. If there's trash or bird seed still out, another bear is just going to come get into the same issue. So that didn't really solve anything. And then as you saw from that one map, bears can travel long, long distances to get back to where they came from. And often in Virginia, unfortunately, and other states, those long travel distances, they're going to cross a lot of roads, and they're not really great about looking both ways before they cross the road. And so you can end up with them getting killed by vehicles as they're trying to go back home. So we do not move or translocate bears. In the rare instances where we move a bear, like last week in Richmond, we are simply helping that bear get out of a spot where it was stuck. He couldn't get out of that area without running into a whole lot of people. We moved him slightly outside of the city, put him back out, let him go and find his own place to live. So how can you manage these human bear conflicts? So we are a member of, you'll see kind of the logo here everywhere called BearWise, and I've got some resources at the end that have a website to the BearWise information. Super great organization that we're a member of. And basically, it just gives you simple facts, simple ways that you can do your part to keep bears wild, keep them out of things. And so the big one is just food. It's just removing or securing those food sources. Again, everything from bird feeders, trash, compost piles, beehives, any of those things, just keeping it secured, that bear's going to move on. We also encourage people, not to let a bear become comfortable in your space. So a bear in your yard that's a kind of approaching a house, we tell people, hey, make some loud noises, use a car horn, honk at him. We want him to stay back away from your space. Preventing conflict is certainly best. Once a bear has gotten a food reward, it can be harder to teach them that they need to leave that alone. So we want to prevent these conflicts before they ever occur rather than having to mitigate them after the fact. And bear wise is not just at home. This is, when you're at work, your place of business needs to be bear wise and keep attractants up. And then when you're out recreating, camping, hiking, things like that. So around your house, some simple steps. And like I said, we've got information at the end that'll take you to our website or to BearWise that has a lot more information on this. But the biggest one is, keeping those food resources secured. Keep your trash inside or in a secure container that a bear can't get into. Don't leave pet food out overnight, or if you store pet food outside, again, it needs to be in some type of bear resistant container. Trash is our biggest one. Trash is always our number one conflict call year after year. So this is the one we really try to work a lot with people to try to secure their trash. From April to December, just go ahead and take your bird feeders down. Plant some native plants, have a nice little bird habitat in your yard, but take the bird feeder down so the bear just can't get into that and make a mess there. So while you're out camping, same thing, just keeping those food resources secured. So utilize the bear resistant containers that are often found at campsites all across Virginia and other areas. Utilize bear hangs. In your tent, don't keep food in your tent. Store your food away from the tent area there. Clean up your grill. And then, of course, report any bears. If you see a bear on your campsite, in your campsite, like some of these photos here, always report that to the park that you're staying in. And then hiking and wildlife watching, same thing, just kind of being aware of your surroundings, not leaving food out available for anything to get. Walking, if you're hiking, you can use bear bells or making noise. And if you are approaching a bear, you see a bear in a trail, just making a little bit of noise, letting that bear know that you're there, and then backing away from it, letting the bear kind of have the right of way. But the big one with this, if you're out hiking, is really keeping pets on a leash. Most of our encounters where a person has had an encounter with a bear have been due to pets off leash that end up chasing the bear. Then the pet comes running back to you, chases the bear right by you. And thankfully, most of these have been pretty minor where somebody gets a scratch or a small bite. But again, we don't want that to happen. So keeping your pets on a leash is super important to mitigate any of these issues. All right, so now we'll switch over to kind of a sad topic here, but I think it's important to kind of show we do have an issue ongoing across the state, and you can see on the map there, it's a pretty big area of the state now, with sarcoptic mange in our bear population. So mange is a highly contagious mammalian skin disease that any mammal can get. So foxes, coyotes, dogs, people, all mammals can be susceptible to mange. And probably a lot of folks have seen foxes or coyotes with mange before in the past. But it's been only in about the last 10 to 12 years that we've really started to see it pop up in black bears in Virginia. So the mite that we're seeing in our bears is called Sarcoptes scabii. Little tiny microscopic mite. He's up there in the top right of the slide. You can't see him with the naked eye. You'd have to look at him under a microscope. But these little guys burrow in under the skin of the host. and then they can lay hundreds and hundreds to thousands of eggs. And as they burrow through there, of course, it causes this intense itching. Then you get hair loss, kind of some crusting of the skin. Sometimes you can get secondary infections or wounds just from the animal scratching or biting at it. And unfortunately, over time, if this progresses, the animal can get in pretty poor condition. They can just become emaciated, kind of get some altered behavior. And we've seen animals, bears, succumb to this and end up dying just due to that emaciation over time. So, unfortunately, we first started out with only a few reports up around Frederick, Shenandoah County back in 2014. And we thought, well, okay, this is just a few bears with mange, no big deal. Hopefully, this will kind of run its course and move on. And since that time, now we average 200 plus. I think last year we had 346 reports of mange and black bears. And as you can kind of see from that graphic, I know it's probably a little bit small. It's now spread all the way down as far south into counties like Pulaski, Patrick, Floyd, Franklin, Carroll County. So we've got it all along the Blue Ridge and then a little bit to the east, kind of following the James River along the east into places like Goochland, Louisa, Fluvanna, some of those counties as well. So some common things we get asked about mange. Probably the biggest one is, do you treat bears? Or if people know that we don't treat bears, why do we not treat them? And so, as I mentioned earlier, we did try an experimental treatment early on with our mange infestation. And we found that while you can treat the bear and you can resolve those first clinical symptoms, once you put the bear back out on the landscape, those mites are out there and they can actually just get infected again. And so all of the bears that we treated in those early years, we GPS collared, they all ended up getting mange again. And we actually had to put them down because their second mange infection was so much worse even than their first one. So that just didn't really work really well. It's also really difficult to treat wild animals. We can't go out and capture and take all of these animals into captivity to treat them, but we can't put anything broad scale out on the landscape either. There's a lot of animals that it would be detrimental to have that type of drug out on the landscape for them. It's also FDA law that any animal that's a food animal, which black bears are considered a food animal, have to be marked if they get treated with any type of drug at all. So every animal we would treat has to be then captured, has to be put to sleep so we can put an ear tag in it. So just a whole lot of extra effort that would have to go into each of those animals and stress that that would cause for all of those animals. So treatment just hasn't been shown to really be an effective way to deal with this. Pennsylvania has been a state that has had mange in their bear population for going on 30 plus years. They did a large research project looking at treatment versus not treatment, and thankfully, they found that there was really no difference in survival between treated and untreated bears. They had a close to 80% survival rate, even in bears that were not treated, that were in poor condition. So, thankfully, we think over time bears can kind of work up an immune response to this and be able to survive it without treatment. So how does mange spread? So it's mostly bear-to-bear transmission. So during the breeding season, as bears are together, they're going to spread it in a den type situation. The female to her offspring can spread it. But then also one of the big ones is kind of unnatural, let's see, congregation of bears around food sources. So here's the whole family, mom with her yearlings here. There was a bird feeder that had been placed in this area. Bird feeder is fallen down. Is hanging out, eating around the bird feeder, shaking off mites, scratching. So, if they didn't already all have it, they would spread it to each other if other bears came in there. And then other future bears that come through can also now pick it up from mites that could have come off on the landscape. So, any of this unnatural congregation of bears from feeding, we certainly want to stop so that it doesn't spread. And then one of the big questions we have had is mange actually impacting our bear population? Pennsylvania did not see this. They've had mange again in their population for quite some time, did not see that it impacted it. We were starting to see differently. And so we decided, thankfully, we were able to do a pretty large scale research project to look into this. So the last little bit I've got here, we'll just kind of go over a couple of research projects that we've got. The big one I will highlight is this Virginia bear mange study that we're working with Virginia Tech on to look at. One is population impacts, but a lot of other factors in with it as well. And I've got our website up here. The students created a really cool website with a lot of information about the project. They try to post blogs. You can actually sign up to get updated anytime they post a blog on the project there. So feel free to, grab a screenshot of that website, or if you search Virginia Bear Mange Study, that should come up as well. So the first part of the project, we've kind of got two big areas of this project. We have a northern and a southern study site. So our northern study site is our mange endemic area where we have mange on the landscape. So we're in the counties of Botetourt, Rockbridge, Augusta, Allegheny, and Bath. And so the first part of the project was to get a better idea of the density of bears in a mange area versus a non-mange area using what are called hare corrals or hare snares. These are simply, you can see a photo kind of down in the bottom left. It is just barbed wire, 1 to 2 strands wrapped around some trees with a scent lure in the middle of that the bear walks under that wire and it's going to pull out a little tuft of hair. So hopefully you can kind of see that middle photo there. It's just one of the students with their hand up against the barbed wire and there's a tuft of bear hair on it. And so every week these students are out there pulling those hair samples off to then take back and they'll be analyzed for genetics. And they can look then and see, okay, which bears went to which corrals, how many times were they there to get a density analysis across all of these. So our southern study site is kind of our control area where we don't yet have mange on the landscape, and that's down in Grayson, Smith, and Wythe. So for the past 2 summers, they've deployed about 80 sites, 80 hare corrals in both of these areas. So 80 in the north, 80 down in the south. Collected hair once a week for 8 weeks. And then also paired that up with trail cameras on each of these sites to look at bear movement, and in the northern area to also look at mange and be able to estimate mange severity on it. So this has been ongoing. They've been collecting a whole lot of hair. It's been really good. Our first 2 field seasons have been completed. We'll finish up the third one this summer, and then the student's going to work on some density analysis from there. So one student has already completed her master's project where she actually took all the camera data and looked at the density of mange across the landscape in one of these corral areas and the severity of mange. And so she created this heat map across that study area that just kind of shows where were we getting more mange reports and then how severe were those mange reports. We have a scoring system from 1 to 9 that we can score these bears, and so she was able to use that camera data to do that. So super interesting information, really helps us track, where are we seeing mange on the landscape. And then now she's using this information with us to look more in depth at habitat variables. Is there something in these areas where it's more dense pockets of mange that maybe can help us figure out why we're seeing that mange there? The second part of the project has 2 PhD students on it who are working more with actually capturing and collaring black bears. And they're using this collar information then to look at movements, resource selection, home ranges, and actually differences in behaviors and activity of mange affected bears and non-mange affected bears. This will also end up going into a large integrated population model that's going to help us bolster how we do our population analysis all across the state. So we're super excited about this one. The first 2 field seasons again have been completed. We've had over 100 bears captured and collared between the 2 study areas. Also have had some bears with mange that we've been able to collar and then follow them. And so this year will be the last field season of that one, and we're really going to target mange affected bears up in that northern area to try to collar more of those and kind of track survival, movements, any reproduction data that we can get from them. So really great work. These students have been working hard the last few summers, and we're really excited about what this project's going to show us and bring forward. And so again, that website will have more. Hopefully there will be some more information we can put out probably soon, doing some more webinars and things about the project and what we're seeing out there. And then in addition to that one, so the Bear Mange project is a pretty big one, but we've also been a part of several other projects across the state here for the past few years. So there's been a really neat bobcat and bear habitat and connectivity project that Nicole Gorman from Virginia Tech has worked on. So she trapped bobcats in Albemarle County and has put GPS collars on them and is looking at habitat and movement connectivity, particularly with Interstate 64 right up there and how these cats interact with that large highway. And then she's also using bear data from bears from some previous projects in the mountains, and then some current data we've got from some bears that are GPS collared in our Piedmont area. Again, looking at these large scale movement patterns of bears on the landscape. There previously was a large Appalachian carnivore project that was over in Bath and a little bit of Highland County that looked at bears, bobcats, and coyotes and kind of their impact on deer populations in areas that had kind of poor deer habitat, honestly. And so that was a really neat project, but from it, we had a student, Brogan Holcomb, who ended up doing a master's project where she analyzed kind of bear diet and behavior using both GPS collar data and then cameras on bear collars. And so I know it's a little bit hard to see, but the bear in the photo in the bottom of this screen, it actually has kind of a GoPro style camera mounted to the base of the GPS collar. And so while this bear is walking around, it's taking video, we call it the bear's eye view, of exactly what that bear is eating, doing, all kinds of neat stuff. And so Brogan was able to kind of pair this up, really get more in depth on diet analysis of black bears, and then behavior. How much time do these bears spend, hunting, foraging, sleeping? A lot of times sleeping, we have found out. Just what exactly are they doing out there? And she is actually continuing on with that project, kind of uh, doing much more mathematical analysis now for a PhD project where she's pairing up some of the camera data with accelerometer, so kind of like activity monitoring data that comes with all GPS collars. She's doing some pretty in-depth stuff with that now for a PhD project. We have another project we call the Piedmont Project. This is where we actually are studying kind of home ranges, resource selection, space use in the Piedmont part of Virginia, just a spot where we hadn't had any bear research going on before. And then a benefit of that project, while we have these female black bears GPS collared, we use them often as foster moms. So if we get orphan cubs during a time of year when the bears are still in their den, we can take these cubs there to these female bears that are denned up that have a collar and give them some extra cubs. And thankfully, black bears are really good moms. They take these cubs in pretty readily. And so that's kind of been a nice benefit of that project while we're also learning more about bears in the Piedmont area. And then we have a project, we actually just met with a student last week that might do some microbiome analysis with, again, mange affected and non-mange affected bears in the state, just to see if there's some relationship between their gut health and mange susceptibility or their ability to get over mange. So this will be really interesting. Haven't done anything like that yet in Virginia, so we're pretty excited about that project. And with that, I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions here. So these are just some additional resources. Our Black Bear Management page has lots and lots of information on dealing with bear conflict, mange, just general facts about bears. So I encourage you, check out our website. The Bear Wise website is great. Lots of great fact sheets, again, on living with bears. There's kid activities on there. You can puzzles and all kinds of coloring pages and great stuff there. And then really important, that number at the bottom is our toll-free wildlife conflict helpline. And so if you're having a conflict with a bear or any other wild animal, groundhog, fox, any of those things, you can call that conflict number. You'll get some great information on how to deal with that issue, whatever issue you're having. And that's also the place where we ask people to report if you do see a bear that you think might have mange. You can call the conflict line and report it there. And so with that, I'll be happy to take some questions.
Very important. All right. Switching over to questions, and for those in attendance, please continue to add questions to the Q&A box. You can add them to the chat, but preferably to the Q&A, and I'll go ahead and start with some that were asked a little earlier. I think you touched on this, Katie, but it's probably good to reiterate. When would it be safe to put out bird feeders in the Waynesboro area? A neighbor has sighted a bear at her bird feeder a few years ago.
Yep, so we generally say from April 1st to about December 1 is the time to not have bird feeders up. Again, just to be safe, we'd like to prevent the problem rather than waiting for a bear to get into it and then taking it down. So around April 1 is when most bears are up moving, and then they can stay up through early December. So April 1 to December 1 is a good time to just not have your bird feeder up if you have the space. Plant some native plants instead, and you can still enjoy birds, but not have to worry about the bear so much.
Good deal. Um, let's see. Somebody asked, "What's the background of the cubs you were holding? Orphaned, rescued." Great photo. I think that one's directed at me, but Katie, you might have had one too. So that was a winter den check for myself in that picture. And Katie, you kind of talked about that. Do you want to talk about winter den checks at all?
Yeah, sure. So kind of the photo here, that's exactly what we're doing. I'm down in a den with this female black bear. She is asleep. She has been anesthetized, so she is very much more asleep than she would have been when we first got up there to her. So we'll go in the wintertime. Sometimes we will do this where we'll actually sedate the bear, handle her, check the GPS collar, measure cubs if she's got cubs. Other times we just go to the dens and we'll stay a little ways away and just put up cameras. If we don't need to handle the bear, we can just put some cameras up. We'll catch them when they leave the den and kind of can count cubs that way as well. It's difficult, and Trapper can probably speak to it in these warmer climates that we have. These bears, they don't truly hibernate, so they are awake. When you go to the den, their heads up, they're looking at you. They can run out of there, so we have to be pretty cautious. We don't want them to abandon that den, leaving their cubs behind or anything like that. So we have to really kind of weigh the cost benefit of working the den, especially a lot of them here in Virginia are ground dens. They're just in brush piles or in some kind of just out in the old ground. They're not in trees so much anymore. So that bear really is pretty aware that you're around them when they're out there in their den these days.
Can bears and fox catch mange from each other?
Yes, if they're sharing a den site, so say maybe the bear excavated a den and then the fox decides to use it or vice versa, it is the same mite. And so there are different mites. There's another mite called Demodex. There's a Demodetic mange. That's mostly what we see our foxes and coyotes get, but they can have sarcoptes as well. So yes, it's the same mite, same. We've actually sent off samples from coyotes and foxes in Virginia to look at the mite and look at the genetics, and it is all the same. So yep, they can certainly share it. Probably most likely if for some reason they shared a den site would be our most probable guess of how they both get it.
Related to that, someone mentioned that they thought sarcoptic mange may have been introduced by humans for some sort of biological control out west. Wolves and coyotes. Did this happen in the east as far as the introduction? I don't know. They're asking about the source of the mange.
Yeah, I don't know. They are correct. It was introduced out, I don't remember if that was Wyoming, a western state for wolf control was how it first got in the US at least. How it got to Virginia, I'm not 100% sure, but we know it's been on our landscape for probably over 100 years. There's been records of foxes, at least, and coyotes with mange for long, long periods of time. Our really big question is we know that mite has been on the Virginia landscape for years and years. Foxes and coyotes have been getting mange. What has changed that now these bears are showing symptoms? That's kind of the big question. Bears have probably been picking up this mite before, but didn't seem to have an impact from it. So we're not really sure what has changed in the bear or with the mite or the landscape that's now making these bears susceptible to it.
That's a good transition into the next question. Someone was asking if climate change, warming climate, had anything to do with the increase.
It certainly could. So we don't know for sure yet, but that mite can live off the host in pretty warm climates. So it doesn't have to be on a host for that mite to still survive. And so certainly a little bit warmer temperatures, especially warm and humid, seems to be where that mite really likes to live. Freezing temperatures tend to kill it. And so our assumption would be that yes, as temperatures warm, especially, bears are up out of dens a little bit earlier. This could be kind of increasing that life cycle that the mite is able to survive and be out on the landscape.
You did say that mange can be transmitted to humans, but I think you said primary would be like through consumption of the animal. Is that correct? Any other
No, it
transmission
actually
pathways?
just be touching it. Yep,
Okay.
just if for some reason, which you shouldn't be touching a mangy animal, but if for some reason, you were touching the animal, say it had been maybe hunter harvested and you touched it and it did have mange, it does take, it's not like these mites are just jumping right off of it. They're burrowed deep in the skin, so it does take quite a bit of contact for those mites to come off, but it can transmit to people. I will say several of us that have worked with mangy bears have ended up with it. And thankfully, for most people, it's just a really mild skin irritation. What we have heard, the only folks who usually have, significant issues possibly with it, if you have any, underlying immune system issues that could cause a more severe reaction. But for most people that get it, it's pretty mild, kind of like a case of chiggers, which is not fun, but
It does not sound fun. Does not sound pleasant.
no, no.
Um, Someone asked about what your thoughts are about. I think they mean protecting travel corridors for wildlife and potentially crossings to allow the animals, including bears, to safely travel over or under highways. How important is that?
Super important. As you see, I mean, anybody, if you look at a map of Virginia, we've got roads everywhere, and these bears, their habitat's on both sides of that road, so they're going to cross it constantly. And it's really amazing, if anybody has read anything about the fencing project and the underpasses there on Afton Mountain on 64. It was amazing to see the number of animals, one that were crossing that road prior to the underpasses kind of being fenced and funneled that way, and now how many animals use those underpasses. And so for bears, especially, they really don't mind. They will use culverts, large size culverts under roads. They'll certainly use overpasses as well, but they're kind of thankfully one of those animals that doesn't mind using an underpass, which typically tends to be a little bit easier to get to get rather than building a big overpass. But yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I was just down Interstate 81 around Roanoke last week and saw two different bears that had gotten hit by vehicles and killed on Interstate 81. We get it all across the state from small roads to big roads that these animals just unfortunately are getting hit. Just trying to get back and forth to things that they need.
Um, Someone asked if so they watch wildlife cameras out west, watching the big brown bears eat fish in the streams. Do Virginia black bears eat fish?
Very rarely. I think it's just because we don't have these big sources, like out west, they've got the salmon run, and that short time period, there's a ton of food right there. We just don't really have anything quite like that. Now, I will say we've had some issues at our trout hatcheries where there are lots and lots of fish in a very small, confined runway outside where bears have learned that, oh, wow, there's a lot of fish right here. So that's really been about the only instance we've seen. I'm sure if they're, out in the river or a creek and they can catch a hold of one, they might, but it has not been found in Brogan's research with where she had the cameras on bears. We got a lot of bears swimming, never saw them eat any fish, and that didn't come up in any of her diet analyses either. So I think it's fairly rare in Virginia for them to eat any fish.
Um, do you have any insight to how many bears are killed on the roads each year and any steps that are being taken to try to reduce the number of roadkill deaths?
Yeah, so we do get data from state police. It comes through Department of Motor Vehicles every year. We get deer collision data and bear collision data. Now, it's not perfect. To get that data, somebody has to actually report the accident to the police, and some people don't, I guess. They might hit an animal and then they don't report it, and so that doesn't go into the system. So it really varies across the state. We have seen an increase, certainly, which it used to be we'd maybe get 50 to 60 reports, and now it's more like a couple hundred to 350 plus bear reports. We're working, VDOT has got some really great stuff they're doing, creating an app where both their VDOT field office folks and contractors who pick up roadkill can actually start logging this information. And that will be a huge help just to know more about where are these hot spots where bears are getting hit, how many are getting hit would really be really important for us. So we're certainly working with them on that. And then that would kind of dictate where we might be able to do some type of corridor projects, likely underpasses or something like that.
Right. Great answer. Let's see here. Someone asked Katie, what is your favorite part of working with bears?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I pretty much like all of it. I think you said it at the beginning. They're charismatic, and I just like that they're pretty smart. They're not dumb animals at all. Most animals are not dumb, and so it's always funny to me. I know they can be frustrating for a homeowner if you've got a conflict and this bear just keeps getting into things. But I try to help spin it around of like, look how ingenious this bear has kind of figured out how to get into, whether it's your trash or your bird feeder. So kind of trying to problem solve some of that is a lot of fun. And then I just love, when we're out, getting to see one out in the field. I don't know. To me, seeing a bear in the wild is kind of just like that epitome of what's great about, wildlife work and what's truly wild out there. So, pretty much all of it. I really liked a lot of it.
Good answer. Um, hold on, I might be missing one. Do female bears establish dens in counties of Virginia where winters are milder? Um, so I know you touched a little bit about hibernation or maybe more so torpor. And then there's another question about as the climate warms, is it possible that in the deeper south, southeast, will bears not hibernate at all? So maybe you can just talk about um, do all female bears establish a den um, where winters are mild, and as the climate warms, could there be a chance that they don't hibernate at all?
Yeah, good question. So they do, female bears that are going to give birth to cubs do create a den. And again, it can just be a ground nest. Some of them will use just like pine straw, leaf pile. They'll kind of get into that. So if they're having cubs, regardless of how hot it is, they are going to have a den just because they need a place that's secure to have the cubs. Those little cubs, when they're born, are pretty helpless. They can weigh, less than half a pound. Eyes are closed, ears aren't fully opened, where they can hear. So they got to be in some type of protected area. So she's going to have a den. What we are seeing as it's warmed up, though, is these bears are kind of entering their dens later and then exiting earlier. So it used to be across the state, April 15th was kind of the first we'd start seeing den emergence, and that was more in the east. And then heck, in the mountains, it might be the 1st of May, middle of May before bears would leave their den. This past year, we had bears with cubs out of their dens by March 20th, which is just way early. There's not a lot of food out there. You've got tiny, tiny cubs on the landscape. So even in warmer areas, though, they are going to den, but it's certainly shifting their timing of den when they go into a den. But there's black bears in Florida where I don't know, probably doesn't get below 60, 70 degrees in the winter down there, and those bears are still, if they're having cubs, they're going to have a den to have the cubs, but they're not in it for super long periods of time.
All right. Well, I think we should probably stop there. I know we're at time. There's definitely still some more questions, so maybe we can transcribe those over to you, Katie, and have you answer some with some follow up materials. Folks, thank you so much for joining tonight. Great webinar. Katie, special thanks to you for taking the time to educate us and share this knowledge. We will be following up with you all with the recording, and hopefully Katie will be kind enough to share some of those resources she mentioned in that follow up email. We'll make sure you get it. So everyone, stay cool out there, stay safe, be bear wise because 'tis the season. Thank you again, Katie, and we will see you next time. Appreciate it.
Thanks a bunch. That was awesome.
Thanks, Katie. Have a good night.
Yep, you guys too. See ya.
Bye, Kylie. Thank you.
Bye.